Ukraine has just invaded Russia for the first time, and they've actually taken control of some Russian territory. Now, I'm sure you've already heard about it, but I'm going to cover the small details really quickly. According to satellite images, within about 24 hours of Ukraine invading, they had already taken control of Russian land up to about 10 kilometers past the Russian border. Now, Russian President Putin responded to this and said this is, quote, a large-scale provocation, but it's certainly not an invasion. But in comparison to this, the Ukrainian President Zelensky said, quote, Russia has brought the war to others, but now it's finally coming home. Ukraine has always only wanted peace, and we will definitely ensure peace. Now, in reality, this does seem as if it's quite a big thing, except truthfully, it's not really. The blue area on the picture on screen shows the area that Ukraine now controls in Russia after they invaded. Obviously, you can tell it's not very much, but whether or not this damages Russia or not, we don't actually know, except you can overlook the fact that Ukraine has broken past Russia's defenses, and they have taken control of some land. But this does seem to be more of a publicity stunt from Ukraine to try and get more support for Ukraine. It doesn't seem like they're actually trying to defeat Russia. But it's been a week since the invasion and not really much has changed since. But if you're new here, this is my weekly news recap where I summarize all of the news from the last week, although I will admit this is like my first video in a month and a half, but I'm back now. Staying on Ukraine though, for the first time in 3 months, Ukraine fired a huge amount of drones towards Moscow. According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, Russia shot down 11 drones over the Moscow region, and this footage shows the moments that some of those drones were shot down. And the mayor of Moscow said this is, quote, one of the largest ever attempts to attack Moscow with drones. Now, something else to note, the Russian MOD in the same statement said that they shot down a total of 45 drones in that same night, all of which were heading towards Moscow. Now, at the moment, it's unknown what those drones' targets were and what they were trying to hit, and it's probably unlikely that we're ever actually going to find out. But what this does show at the moment is that Ukraine is definitely getting more aggressive, and they're definitely launching more attacks on Russia, especially after they invaded Russia last week. Now, one quick point on Ukraine again, Belarus has just sent a third of its entire army to the border with Ukraine. And the president of Belarus, Lukashenko, said that he only did this after Ukraine launched their invasion into Russia last week. He spoke on this and said, quote, seeing Ukraine's aggressive policy, we've sent troops to certain points in case of war. Now, Belarus didn't say exactly how many troops they've sent to the border, except it's estimated to be between 15 and 20,000. But of course, you have to remember that it's very unlikely that these countries are actually going to go to war because there's no benefit to going to war. Now, moving to the Middle East, the US has just sent a nuclear submarine to the Middle East to help defend Israel. The US Defense Secretary said, quote, we will take every possible step to defend Israel. And as well as this, at the same time, the US ordered the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier fleet to the same region of the Middle East for the same reason, to defend Israel. And the US Pentagon also announced that they're going to be sending more fighter jet squadrons and some other Navy ships to the same region of the Middle East to, quote, mitigate the possibility of a regional escalation by Iran. Now, according to the Pentagon, this nuclear submarine and US carrier fleet was only sent to Israel after the US spoke to the Israeli defense minister. And because of this, it's left people to believe that Israel asked the US to send this nuclear submarine, and then the US basically followed their orders and did. But of course, you have to remember that this nuclear submarine is likely only being sent as a deterrent. It's very unlikely that the US is actually going to strike Iranian soil. But the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier fleet does obviously have those frigates and air defense ships, which is very likely to be used if a country was to launch an attack on Israel. Like the previous Iranian attack on Israel back in May, the aircraft carrier fleet would likely try and intercept those Iranian drones that were fired towards Israel as they were flying over the Middle East. But as this progresses, I'll definitely make more videos on it. Now, back to Russia. For the first time, they announced that they're going to be doing joint naval exercises with Indonesia. And because of this, it's actually really annoyed the US, as Indonesia is such a strategically important country to be allies with. Russia said, quote, it's going to be the first joint Indonesian-Russian naval exercises since Indonesia gained their independence 79 years ago. And the Indonesian Navy commander said, quote, the exercises will consist of 2 phases. The first will take place in the ports of Surabaya and the second in the Java Sea area. And he also added that both countries will be sending 3 naval ships to participate in these exercises. And the US once again confirmed, as expected, that they're going to be, quote, focused on maintaining peace and stability in the region. But this move from Indonesia certainly shows what countries they're going to be working with economically, probably in the future. Now, staying on Russia though, Russia's just overtaken Saudi Arabia as China's largest oil supplier. You probably know, but after the West placed sanctions onto Russia over their invasion of Ukraine, Russia was forced to sell their oil to other countries like China. And a new investigation found that in 2023, Russia made up 19% of China's oil imports compared to Saudi Arabia, which made up 15%. And so because of the Western sanctions on Russia, not only has it made Russia less dependent on the West, but it's also pushed countries like Russia and China closer together, and they've now become really good allies. And some more details, in 2023, the same year, China spent about $60 billion on Russian oil, and they were buying the Russian oil for approximately 10% cheaper than the Saudi Arabian oil. And the reason that Russia is selling this oil for slightly cheaper is once again simply that the Western sanctions have forced Russia to sell the oil to other people, so there's less demand for it. And as I'm talking about trade between Russia and China, in the same year in 2023, the trade between Russia and China was worth about $240 billion, which is up 26% from the previous year. But in summary, Russia's now China's largest oil supplier due to the Western sanctions that were placed on Russia. Now, one quick point, the Russian President Putin visited Azerbaijan last week. And this is important because Azerbaijan's quite an important country at the moment. If you don't know, Israel gets about 40% of their oil from Azerbaijan, and they obviously need that to continue their war in Gaza. And Russia said that this meeting was to, quote, address various global and regional concerns. But of course, it's worth knowing that this meeting also was focusing on the peace agreements between Armenia and Azerbaijan. But another thing, if you've watched my videos, you should know by now that Russia has created a new global shipping lane which travels through Azerbaijan. And that shipping lane is called the North-South Transport Corridor. Instead of the cargo going on ships and then sailing around the Mediterranean and then through the Suez Canal, the cargo goes on trains and heads straight down to Iran, where it then goes on ships and then sails around the world. But these railways that go down to Iran from Russia do go straight through Azerbaijan, so it's very likely that Putin and the president of Azerbaijan spoke about this new shipping lane. Now, moving to the US, last week the US officially accused Iran of interfering in the upcoming US presidential election. The US said, quote, we've observed increasingly aggressive Iranian activity during this election cycle. Iran actually responded to this, and they said to the United Nations that the accusations from the US are, quote, unsubstantiated and are devoid of any standing. But it's worth knowing that just earlier this month, Donald Trump accused Iran of interfering in his campaign and hacking one of his campaign websites. Although Iran, when they were speaking to the United Nations, did pressure the UN to force the US to release proof of their claims of this. Iran said, quote, we've previously announced that Iran has neither the intention nor the motive to interfere with the US presidential election. And as I said, something to note is that the US hasn't actually yet released any proof of this claim. At the moment, they've just accused Iran of interfering in the election without actually releasing proof of it. But it's always possible, as this intelligence could be classified or something like that, because it's obviously intelligence. So truthfully, we will probably never know. Now, moving to North Korea, there's a really quick point. North Korea, about 2 weeks ago, announced that they're going to be opening to tourists again for the first time in 5 years. And it's expected that this could come as soon as December, so I'll definitely keep you updated on that. But separately, this last part's important, at least for me, and obviously everyone that enjoys watching this channel. You might not even know by now, but I've actually been basically totally demonetized across all social media platforms, and it all happened at basically the same time, and I don't have the option to appeal, it just all got taken away. And so because of that, it means that I'm now struggling to fund these videos, and it means I can't make as many of them, which is basically why I haven't been posting as much. And so if you want to help fund the making of these videos and help fund all of the research that goes into these videos, because there's a lot and it takes a lot of time, then I would greatly appreciate it if you just joined my Patreon. And luckily there's been a few people who've watched these videos who have joined it, and it really does help more than you know. If you don't know what Patreon is, it's a monthly subscription platform, and all of that money goes to support this channel. You can cancel at any time, but truthfully it helps more than you know. Even if you give just £5 a month, the lowest tier, it's the same as a coffee nowadays, but truthfully it helps me make all of these videos and it makes everything possible. And so if you want to join that Patreon and support the channel, you can go to alexbarnicoat.com, or you can go to the top link in the description. But anyway, thanks again for the support. It means more than you know, and I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.